The amber light filtering through the crystalline walls had a peculiar quality. It made everything look like it was drowning in honey, Marcus thought, which was about as poetic as his brain got after 16 hours of recalibrating plasma regulators. He squinted at the targeting array spread across his workbench, its circuitry exposed like the guts of some mechanical creature that had finally given up pretending to be invincible. The problem with cache technology he'd learned over 3 years of trying to keep it functional was that it operated on principles human engineering still couldn't quite explain. Something about quantum entanglement and crystalline matrices, and a whole lot of hand-waving that made the scientists back on Earth very uncomfortable. You know what your problem is, Valen? Roll's voice cut through his concentration like a plasma torch. Through hull plating, the supply sergeant had appeared in the armory entrance, backlit by the perpetual twilight of the dying star beyond the moon's thin atmosphere. You think too much. Marcus didn't look up from the array. My problem is that this targeting system thinks in base 16 and my diagnostic tools think in binary. Having a cultural misunderstanding. That's exactly what I mean. Too much thinking. Roll crossed the armory floor, his boots echoing off the walls that had once been sacred to whoever built this place. The previous occupants had left in a hurry, probably when the star started its slow collapse, and their weapons still hung on racks carved into the crystalline structure. Ancient things, all edges and ceremonial weight, utterly useless against the racks. You should be like me. I don't think. I just make sure the beer rations don't disappear into the wrong hands. But the beer rations are 70% water and taste like someone filtered them through a boot. See, you're doing it again. Thinking, analyzing. Just drink the damn beer and pretend it's real. Roll leaned against the workbench carefully, avoiding the spread of delicate components. Speaking of things that are real, I hear you got special orders. Marcus' hands paused over a particularly stubborn connector. Word travels fast, but word travels at exactly the speed of bored soldiers with nothing to do but gossip. So what's this about you getting assigned to one of the pointy-eared contingent? They're called Kesh. Roll. We've been fighting alongside them for 3 years. You could try using their actual name. I could. But where's the fun in that? Roll grinned, the expression splitting his weathered face into a map of old scars and new worry lines. Seriously though, you got tagged to work on one of their warriors' gear. That's above your pay grade, my friend. Apparently not anymore. Marcus set down his tools and finally met Roll's eyes. Her name is Shakara. Mean anything to you? But the change in Roll's expression was immediate. The easy humor drained away, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like respect mixed with fear. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? But you look like a man who just realized he's been assigned to maintain the equipment of the most dangerous thing on this moon that isn't actively trying to kill us. Roll pushed off from the workbench, suddenly agitated. Shakara, Jesus. Marcus, she's got a body count that makes the Vrex shock troops look like a minor inconvenience. I saw her once during the Dust Valley engagement. She went through a Vrex fire team like they were made of paper. Didn't even slow down. Marcus returned his attention to the targeting array, though his hands weren't quite as steady now. Well, apparently even unstoppable killing machines need their gear Maintained. This is because you're good with the hybrid tech, isn't it? The human kish. Integration stuff that makes the engineers cry. Roll was pacing now, his boots creating a rhythm against the crystalline floor. Man, I don't know whether to congratulate you or offer my condolences. How about you offer to help me finish this diagnostic so I can actually sleep before she shows up tomorrow? Not a chance. I have a strict policy about not touching anything that might explode, disintegrate, or open a portal to another dimension. Your toys check all 3 boxes, but Roll didn't leave. He stood there watching Marcus work with the kind of attention that suggested he was trying to memorize the moment. You scared? The question hung in the air. Between them, Marcus considered lying, then decided it wasn't worth the effort. Terrified? Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Just maybe don't mention that when she gets here. Warriors don't like working with people who look at them like they're monsters. I don't think she's a monster. Then what do you think she is? Marcus aligned a circuit path, watching the diagnostic readout shift from angry red to cautious amber. I think she's someone who's very good at staying alive in a war that kills almost everyone, and I think my job is to help keep her that way. Roll was quiet for a moment. Yeah. Okay, that's not bad, Valen, not bad at all. He moved toward the entrance, then paused. Hey, you want me to sneak you some of the good rations, the ones that only taste 40% like boot? I'm fine, suit yourself. But when you're trying to make small talk with a legendary alien warrior while elbow deep in her battle armor, you're going to wish you'd eaten something better than the standard protein paste. With that, Roll disappeared into the amber twilight, leaving Marcus alone with the hum of diagnostic equipment and the weight of ancient weapons watching from their crystalline racks. The targeting array finally shifted to green. One piece of equipment saved approximately 600 more, waiting in various states of damage and despair. Marcus stood, stretching muscles that had forgotten what relaxation felt like, and walked to the transparent section of the wall that looked out over the scarred landscape of the moon. In the distance, he could see the percussion flashes of artillery, the war reduced to light and sound, and the stubborn refusal of either side to surrender. The dying star hung above it all, a swollen red giant that cast everything in shades of ending. Tomorrow Shikaru would arrive. Tomorrow Marcus would meet the legend face to face. Tonight he had 16 hours of work left, and maybe 4 hours until exhaustion forced him to sleep. He returned to his workbench, picked up his tools, and got back to the business of keeping people alive in a war that had forgotten what mercy looked like. Marcus had managed exactly 3 hours of sleep when the armory's proximity sensors chimed, a soft crystalline tone that the previous inhabitants had apparently designed to be soothing rather than alarming. He jerked awake at his workbench, a calibration wrench imprinted into his cheek, and tried to remember if he'd actually finished that diagnostic or just dreamed about finishing it. The half-empty cup of something that had once aspired to be coffee sat cold beside his elbow, a skin forming on top that looked vaguely biological. The entrance irised open, another bit of architectural elegance from the moon's former residence, and Shikara stepped through. Marcus's first coherent thought was that legends really should come with a warning label. She moved with a kind of controlled Grace that made every motion seem deliberate, purposeful, like someone had distilled the concept of efficiency into physical form and decided it needed to be unsettling. Her armor caught the amber light and threw it back in. Patterns that hurt to look at directly. The overlapping plates shifting with a sound like wind chimes made of knives. But it was her face that stopped Marcus's scattered thoughts entirely. Pale gray skin, smooth and unmarked, except for a thin scar that traced her jawline, and those eyes, dark enough to be black from a distance, but up close he could see they held depth that suggested she'd seen more years than his entire lineage combined. And the ears, long, elegantly pointed, rising from the fall of black hair that somehow remained perfect despite what had to be constant combat. You are Valen. Her voice carried an accent he couldn't place, vowels shaped by a mouth that had learned human language as a second or third option. Marcus stood too quickly, knocked over the coffee cup, and watched 3 hours of diagnostic notes soak through with ancient caffeine. Yes, Marcus, Valen, that's I'm him. That one of her eyebrows rose fractionally, and he had the distinct impression she was reassessing whether the armorer she'd been assigned to was actually competent or just very good at faking it on paperwork. I am told you work with hybrid systems. She stepped further into the armory, and Marcus noticed she had to duck slightly to avoid one of the hanging ancient weapons that you understand, both human and cache engineering. I understand that they both follow physical laws, and occasionally those laws overlap enough to make something that doesn't immediately explode. Marcus grabbed a rag and made a futile attempt to save his notes. Most of the time is sufficient. Perfect is a luxury we abandoned 2 years ago. She began unfastening her armor with practiced efficiency, her fingers finding clasps and release mechanisms that Marcus had only studied in technical manuals. I require full maintenance. The last engagement stressed the servo assists beyond recommended parameters. Marcus watched her work, trying to catalog the damage visible on the armor's surface, scoring along the right pauldron, deep enough to expose the crystalline substrate beneath. The ablative coating, impact fractures spreading like spider webs across the chest plate, something that looked disturbingly like claw marks raked across the left gauntlet. What exactly were you fighting? Rex shock troops primarily, though there was a singularity mine that proved inconvenient. She lifted the chest plate free, revealing the underlying bodysuit that apparently passed for modesty in cache culture. It was form-fitting enough that Marcus discovered he needed to focus very intently on the armor components to avoid staring. A singularity mine, the kind that creates a localized gravity well strong enough to compress matter into exotic states, the same, and you found it inconvenient. It disrupted my timing. She set the chest plate on his workbench with a heavy thunk that made his tools jump. I was forced to recalibrate my approach vector. Mid-combat, inefficient. Marcus stared at her, trying to determine if she was joking. Her expression remained perfectly neutral. Most people would call surviving a singularity mine miraculous. I'm not most people. She continued, removing armor pieces, creating a growing pile of battle-scarred equipment that represented more repair work than Marcus had seen in a month. Also, the mine did not fully deploy. Manufacturing defect, Perhaps the Vraks have been cutting corners in their ordnance production. So you got lucky. She paused, pauldron in her hands, and looked at him. With those impossibly deep eyes. I do not believe in luck, armor of Valen. I believe in probability, preparation, and the statistical likelihood that my opponents will make mistakes before I do. She set down the pauldron. Thus far I have been correct. Thus far being the key phrase in that sentence. Yes, thus far, something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. You are concerned about my survival. This is good, it suggests. You will be thorough in your work. Marcus picked up the chest plate, feeling the weight of it, the way the hybrid materials had bonded in layers that human metallurgy couldn't quite replicate. I'm concerned that the legendary warrior I'm supposed to keep functional has a fairly casual relationship with the concept of self-preservation. Not casual, calculated. There is a difference. She removed the last piece of armor, the greaves that protected her lower legs, and stood before him in just the bodysuit, even without the armor. She looked dangerous. I have survived 643 combat engagements. Each time I measured the risk against the tactical value. Each time the probability favored my survival if I executed properly. And if you don't execute properly, then you will receive a different warrior to maintain, and this conversation will be irrelevant to you. She said it matter-of-factly, the way someone might discuss the weather or the projected lifespan of a dying star. Marcus sat down on the chest plate and met her eyes directly. Well, I'd prefer to avoid that outcome if possible. I just got your equipment specifications memorized. That earned him what he was now certain was a smile, slight but genuine. Practical concern, I appreciate. Practical concerns. She gestured at the pile of armor components. How long will repairs require? Depends on how honest you want me to be. I always want honesty. Lies are inefficient. Then honestly, this is going to take me at least 40 hours of focused work. The servo assists alone need complete recalibration, and those impact fractures have compromised the structural integrity in ways that he stopped, noticing her expression hadn't changed. You need it faster than that. I deploy again in 36 hours, of course. You do. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, feeling the grit of too many days without proper sleep. Okay, I can do 36 hours if I skip sleep, food, and my remaining will to live. You should not skip food. Malnutrition degrades cognitive function by measurable percentages. She moved to the crystalline wall, examining the ancient weapons with apparent interest. I will return in 12 hours with suitable rations. You don't have to. It is practical. You cannot maintain my equipment if you collapse from hypoglycemia. Therefore, ensuring your nutrition is ensuring my survival. Logic is simple. She touched one of the ancient blades, her long fingers tracing the edge with surprising gentleness. These are beautiful, useless for modern combat, but beautiful. Marcus found himself smiling despite the exhaustion and the 40 hours of work that had just become 36. The people who built this place, they apparently believed weapons should be art. A luxury, Shikaru said, but her voice held something that might have been longing. We have forgotten how to make beautiful things. Now we make only functional ones and hope they last long enough to matter. She turned from the wall and for a moment Marcus saw past the legendary warrior to something more human, or at least more vulnerable beneath. Then her expression shifted back to neutral efficiency, and she moved toward the entrance. 36 hours armor of Valen. I trust you will meet this deadline. Do I have a choice? No, but I appreciate you asking the question anyway. The entrance iris opened, amber light spilling across her face. 12 hours. I will bring food. That does not taste like boots. She disappeared into the dying light, leaving Marcus alone with a pile of damaged armor and the distinct impression that his life had just become significantly more complicated. The rhythm developed without either of them planning it. Shikaru would return from deployment, sometimes after 12 hours, sometimes after 72, and Marcus would read the story, written in scorch marks and impact craters across her armor. He'd started keeping a log, partly for technical purposes and partly because the patterns told him things she wouldn't say out loud. The deep puncture through the back plate meant she'd been ambushed. Sheared off edge of her left pauldron meant close quarters fighting with something strong enough to rip alloy like paper. The countless microfractures spreading across both gauntlets meant she'd been hitting things with her fists again, despite his repeated lectures about how the servo assists weren't designed for that kind of abuse. You know, there are actual weapons integrated into this armor, Marcus said, holding up the gauntlet in question. The crystalline matrix inside had cracked in 3 places, which meant another 4 hours of careful realignment. Plasma projectors, monofilament blades, a whole arsenal of things specifically designed so you don't have to punch your problems to death. Shakara sat on the edge of his workbench, her legs dangling in a way that seemed too casual for someone who could level a building. She'd started doing that, he'd noticed, staying in the armory longer than necessary, watching him work with an attention that should have been unnerving but had somehow become comfortable. The plasma projectors were depleted. The monofilament blades were damaged. The previous engagement. And you didn't think to mention this before going back into combat. I mentioned it to supply. They said replacement parts would arrive with the next shipment. She picked up one of his diagnostic tools, examining it with the careful curiosity of someone trying to understand an alien artifact. The next shipment arrived without the parts, therefore improvisation became necessary. Marcus took the tool from her before she could accidentally trigger something catastrophic. Improvisation, that's what we're calling it when you use military-grade armor as brass knuckles. The Vraks do not respond well to unarmed combat. Their exoskeletons fracture satisfyingly. She said it with the same tone someone might use to discuss a mildly interesting geological formation. I'm going to pretend you didn't just describe breaking alien soldiers in half as satisfying. But would you prefer I lie and say it brings me no satisfaction? You specified honesty as a preference. She tilted her head, the gesture making her ears catch the amber light in a way that Marcus had stopped pretending he didn't notice. Though perhaps some truths are uncomfortable for human sensibilities. It's not uncomfortable, it's just he stopped, realizing he didn't actually know how to finish that sentence. How many what, in this last deployment, how many Vraks? Shakara was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes fixed on something beyond the crystalline walls. 47 confirmed, perhaps 12 more. That could not be verified due to artillery interference. The battle was brief but tactically dense. Marcus said, down the gauntlet, and looked at her. Directly, 59 enemies in 72 hours. Approximately, mathematics is imprecise in combat situations. But and you're sitting here on my workbench like we're discussing the whether should I be sitting differently. I'm unfamiliar with the proper human protocol for discussing casualty counts. She examined her hands, turning them over in the light. Among my people, this would be considered a modest engagement, worth recording but not exceptional. How many names do you carry now? Her hand stilled when she looked at him. Something in her expression had shifted, not quite vulnerable, but closer to it than he'd seen before. You remember that conversation? You said you remember the fallen 643 warriors. That was 3 weeks ago. 671. Now, she said it quietly, each syllable weighted with precision. I recite them before sleep, when sleep comes. Lately, it comes infrequently. Marcus moved closer, close enough to see the faint lines around her eyes that spoke of exhaustion hidden beneath discipline. That's a lot of weight to carry. It is necessary weight to forget them. Would be. She paused, searching for the word. There is no direct translation. The closest human concept would be betrayal, but deeper, more fundamental. As if forgetting would unmake them. Twice. That's not healthy, Shikara. Health is a luxury, memory is a duty. She slipped off the workbench with that liquid grace that made her look like she was pouring herself through space. I should leave. You have work and I am hindering efficiency. You're not hindering anything. Words came out before Marcus could evaluate whether they were appropriate. Stay. I work better when someone's here to stop me from talking to the equipment. You talk to the equipment only when it's being particularly stubborn. Sometimes I threaten it. Roll says I need a vacation. Marcus returned to the gauntlet, feeling her presence behind him like a heat source. Tell me about them. The names, not all of them. Just tell me about one. The silence stretched long enough that he thought she might refuse. Then she spoke, her voice carrying a texture he hadn't heard before. Kesef, she was a scout killed during the Ash Plain advance. She had a talent for languages and would teach obscene phrases in her spare time. Claiming they were polite greetings, she told a human colonel that his mother was a very distinguished waste recycler, and he thanked her for the compliment. But Marcus found himself laughing despite the subject matter. That's terrible. She thought it was efficient humor, maximum impact with minimal setup, something that might have been a smile touch. Shikara's face, the colonel discovered the truth eventually. He was not amused, but he respected the tactical application, tactical rudeness that should be a military specialization. Among the case it essentially is. We find human sensitivity to verbal offense to be both fascinating and tactically exploitable. She moved to stand beside him, watching his hands work the delicate realignment of the crystalline matrix. You have skill with this, the integration of technologies. Most human armorers treat cache components as incomprehensible mysteries. They're not mysteries, they're just operating on principles we haven't fully quantified yet. Quantum entanglement for the targeting systems, crystalline computing for the servo assist, some kind of bioresponsive feedback loop that I'm pretty sure violates 3 laws of thermodynamics. He glanced at her. Your people's engineering is brilliant and terrifying. In equal measure, an accurate assessment of most case achievements, she reached past him, her arm brushing his, and tapped a section of the matrix he'd been about to adjust. This node, it requires 73 degrees rotation, not 0.7. The resonance cascade will destabilize otherwise. Marcus looked at the specifications, then at her. How did you know that? I wear the armor. I feel when the calibration drifts. She tapped the spot. Again, her long fingers surprisingly gentle against the delicate components. Here there is a vibration, subtle but present. It indicates misalignment. And GT, but and GT. He made the adjustment and the diagnostic readout shifted from amber to green. You can feel a 0.03 degree variance, can you not? The sensory feedback is quite distinct. She said it genuinely without condescension, and Marcus realized she actually didn't understand that human perception had limits. Hers didn't. Shakara, humans can't feel quantum level calibration drift. We barely notice when we're bleeding until someone points it out. She blinked, processing this information. That explains much about human combat doctrine, also about roles. Apparent obliviousness to the fact that he has been courting Supply Sergeant Chen for 6 months. And GT, but and GT, wait, what? And GT, you did not notice the prolonged eye contact, the unnecessary conversations about ration distribution, the statistically improbable frequency with which they occupy the same recreational spaces. Shakara tilted her head. I assumed humans were simply very slow about these matters. And GT, Marcus stared at her. You're telling me the legendary warrior who can feel calibration drift in her armor has been watching roles love life? And GT, but and GT, observation is a fundamental combat skill. I merely apply it comprehensively. She paused. Also, it is entertaining. Your species approaches mating rituals with remarkable inefficiency. The amount of time spent on ambiguous signals could be better allocated to direct communication. And GT, says the person who's been sitting on my workbench for 3 weeks having philosophical conversations instead of sleeping. And GT, but and GT, Shakara's expression shifted into something he couldn't quite read. That is different. How? Because this is she stopped, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain. I do not have the words in quiche or in human language. This is different. The moment hung between them, heavy with things neither knew how to articulate. Marcus became acutely aware of how close they were standing, how the amber light caught in her black hair, how her breathing had changed rhythm. Yeah, he said finally, different. The proximity alarm chimed, shattering the moment like glass. Shakara stepped back smoothly, her expression resettling into neutral efficiency. That will be roll with the evening supply distribution. I should depart before he makes assumptions. He's going to make assumptions anyway. Then I should not provide additional evidence. She moved toward the entrance, then paused. Marcus, it was the first time she'd used his given name. He looked up from the gauntlet. Thank you for asking about Cassith, for she gestured vaguely at the space between them. For this, whatever this is, then she was gone. And Marcus was left alone with damaged armor, and the unsettling realization that, somewhere between servo calibrations and tactical discussions different had become important. The artillery barrage started at 400 hours and didn't stop. For 3 days straight, Marcus worked through the concussive rhythm, his hands steady even when the crystalline walls hummed with each impact, sending the ancient weapons swaying on their racks like wind chimes. In a storm, the armory became a processing center for the wounded and the broken, soldiers stumbling in with equipment held together by prayer and improvised welds, asking if he could make miracles happen in the next 10 minutes because they were heading back out. He made miracles happen or close enough that nobody died because their plasma rifle decided to explode instead of fire. Roll appeared sometime during the second day, his face gray with exhaustion and something that looked like poorly suppressed panic. You've seen the feeds from the front. I've been slightly busy keeping people's guns functional. Marcus didn't look up from the power cell. He was recalibrating his 14th in as many hours. Why is it bad? It's 3 kinds of bad. Having a very enthusiastic meeting to discuss becoming a 4th kind of bad. Roll leaned against the workbench and Marcus noticed his hands were shaking. The Vraks brought in heavy armor, not the usual shock troops, the big stuff. See, walkers, gravity displacement cannons, something that command is calling a biological integration platform, which sounds exactly as horrible as you're imagining. Where's our air support? Grounded. Vraks deployed some kind of atmospheric ionization field that turns anything flying above 50 m into very expensive fireworks. Roll picked up a damaged helmet, turned it over in his hands. We're fighting them on the ground, Marcus, on their terms, and we're losing. Marcus set down the power cell and finally looked at his friend. How bad? Dust Valley is gone. The entire eastern perimeter collapsed 6 hours ago. We're falling back to secondary positions, and those secondary positions weren't designed to hold against what they're throwing at us. Roll's voice cracked slightly. Chen's unit got caught in a pincer movement. I haven't heard from her in 8 hours. She's tough. She'll make it back. You don't know that. Nobody knows anything right now except that we're— Roll stopped, his throat working. Sorry, I shouldn't dump this on you. You've got enough to handle. Marcus stood, gripped Roll's shoulder. She'll make it back. And when she does, you're going to stop being an idiot and actually tell her how you feel instead of having statistically improbable conversations about ration distribution. The Roll blinked. How did you did Shikaru tell you? Apparently everyone knows except you and Chen, the Keish warrior with quantum-level observational skills. Found it entertaining. Marcus steered Roll toward the entrance. Go get some sleep, or at least go sit somewhere and pretend to sleep. I'll handle things here. You haven't slept in 48 hours, 56, but who's counting? Marcus gave him a gentle push. Go. That's an order from someone who has no authority to give orders but is going to pretend he does anyway. Roll left and Marcus returned to the power cells and the rifles and the endless stream of equipment that needed fixing before people died. The work became meditative, his hands moving through familiar patterns while his mind drifted to uncomfortable places. He thought about Dust Valley, which he'd visited once and found unremarkably depressing. Now it was just gone. erased by weapons that could unmake matter at the molecular level. He thought about Chen, who made terrible jokes and once tried to trade him 3 months of decent rations for a functioning plasma cutter. He thought about all the people whose names he didn't know, fighting and dying while he sat in a converted shrine and performed technical miracles that wouldn't matter if the line broke completely. He thought about Shikaru somewhere out in that hell, moving through Vrex formations like a force of nature with armor he'd spent weeks perfecting. The entrance iris opened at hour 71 of the barrage. Marcus looked up, expecting another desperate soldier with another impossible repair request, and instead saw Shikaru. She looked like something from a nightmare. Her armor was scorched black across the chest plate, the ablative coating completely burned away to expose bare crystalline substrate beneath. The left arm servo assist hung useless, torn half free from its mounting. Something had carved a furrow across her helmet deep enough that he could see the emergency seal foam that had deployed to keep her skull from becoming an external organ. She walked with a limp that suggested at least one of the leg actuators had failed, each step accompanied by a grinding sound that made Marcus's teeth ache. "Before you ask," she said, her voice distorted by helmet damage, "yes, I survived, obviously, and no, I cannot explain how." Marcus crossed the armory in 4 strides. "Sit down before you fall down. Falling would be inefficient. I require immediate repairs and redeployment in 6 hours. She swayed, slightly contradicting her own statement about falling. "You require immediate medical attention and 12 hours in a regeneration pod." He started working the helmet release, his fingers finding clasps that were half melted. "What the hell did you fight?" "A biological integration platform. Your command's terminology is accurate but insufficient. Imagine a Vex siege walker with organic components grafted directly into the control systems." It was the helmet came free, and Marcus saw her face. The scar along her jaw had company now, a new line traced from her temple to her cheekbone, the skin around it still raw. Her left eye was bloodshot, the white nearly crimson, and when she breathed he could hear a rasp that suggested her respiratory system had encountered something it wasn't designed to handle. "It was learning," she finished, "mid-combat, adapting to my tactics in real time. I have never encountered an enemy system capable of that level of responsive evolution." Marcus set the helmet down with shaking hands. "And you killed it eventually. The process required creative interpretation of my equipment's operational parameters." She touched the ruined chest plate. "Your work held. The structural integrity remained sufficient even when the ablative coating failed. I would have died otherwise." "Don't." The word came out sharper than he intended. "Don't talk about dying like it's a technical footnote in a combat report." Shikaru looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "I am here. Present, functional. The probability was not favorable, but I executed successfully. Is that not sufficient?" "No, it's not." Marcus stopped, forced himself to breathe. "You're bleeding." "Internal bleeding, probably. That rasp in your breathing means you've got lung damage. Your left eye is hemorrhaging. And you're standing here telling me you need repairs in 6 hours like you're a machine instead of a person who nearly died." "I am a warrior." The distinction between machine and person becomes academic under combat conditions. But she sat down on the workbench, the movement careful in a way that confirmed his assessment about internal injuries. Though I acknowledge your concern, it is appreciated. Marcus started removing armor plates, cataloging damage that made his previous repair work look like cosmetic touch-ups. You need medical, real medical, not field patches. Medical is overwhelmed with cases more severe than mine, soldiers who cannot return to combat without intervention. I can return to combat, therefore I am low priority. She winced as he removed the chest plate, exposing the bodysuit. Beneath, it was torn in places, and yes, there was blood seeping through the synthetic fabric. The logic is sound, even if uncomfortable. The logic is going to get you killed. Everything is going to get us killed. Eventually, the war, entropy, the heat, death of the universe. I merely choose to delay my particular death as long as tactically feasible. She caught his hand as he reached for the damaged arm. Assembly, Marcus, I need you to listen. The Rex offensive is not following standard doctrine. The biological integration platforms, the adaptive learning systems, this represents a significant escalation in their capability threshold. I know, Roll told me about Dust Valley. Her fingers tightened on his hand. Dust Valley was a probing action, a test of our response capabilities. The true offensive will come within 72 hours, and when it does, she stopped, and he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Fear, actual undisguised fear. When it does, the probability mathematics become unfavorable. You're saying we're going to lose. I'm saying the current tactical situation suggests a high likelihood of catastrophic failure unless significant variables change. She released his hand, looked down at her own palms. I have survived 671 engagements by maintaining accurate probability assessments. This is the first time those assessments suggest my survival is statistically improbable. Marcus sat down beside her on the workbench, close enough that their shoulders touched. Then we change the variables. How? We cannot manufacture additional forces. We cannot counter their technological adaptation rate. We cannot. We make your armor better. We give you every possible advantage. We stack the deck until the probability shift. He looked at her profile, the elegant line of her jaw, the way her long ears caught the amber light. I've kept you alive this long. I'm not stopping now. Shakara turned to face him, and the distance between them collapsed too. Nothing. You cannot promise that. Watch me. He raised his hand to her face, carefully avoiding the fresh injury. I'm very good at my job, and my job is keeping you functional. I am not a machine. I know. His thumb traced her cheekbone, featherlight. Believe me, I know. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, they held that same uncertainty he'd seen once before, weeks ago, when she couldn't find words in quiche or human language. This is tactically inadvisable. Probably it creates emotional complication that could compromise operational efficiency. Almost certainly, I should leave, return to my unit, maintain appropriate professional distance, but she didn't move, and neither did he. You should. Marcus agreed, but you're not going to. No. Her hand came up to cover his, pressing it gently against her face. I am not. The proximity alarm chimed. They separated smoothly, professional distance reasserting itself like armor plating, but something had shifted. fundamental and irreversible. And when Shikaru stood to face whoever was entering, Marcus could see she felt it. 2. The weight of probability and the fragile defiance of caring about someone in a war that would take what it wanted. Regardless, the intelligence briefing came down at 1800 hours, massive Rex formation. Detected, estimated arrival in 36 hours. Composition suggesting this was the main offensive everyone had been dreading. Command's response was admirably concise: hold the line or die trying. No third option available. Good luck and may whatever gods you believe in have mercy, because the Rex certainly won't. Marcus read the brief twice, then deleted it and got back to work. Shikaru's armor lay spread across every available surface in the armory, each component representing hours of labor he didn't have. But he'd made a promise, and Marcus Valen had never been particularly good at breaking promises, even when they were tactically inadvisable. He'd reinforced every stress point, triple-checked every servo connection, integrated redundancies into systems that already had redundancies, because paranoia was just good engineering when people's lives depended on your work. The chest plate alone had taken 12 hours. He'd stripped away the damaged ablative coating and replaced it with a hybrid matrix he'd been designing in his head for weeks. Human carbon composite, bonded to quiche crystalline substrate, layers so thin they were barely visible. The whole assembly capable of dispersing energy across multiple dimensional vectors. It was experimental. It was probably insane. It was also the best work he'd ever done. You are aware that you have not slept in 60 hours. Shikaru's voice came from the entrance, and Marcus didn't bother looking up from the gauntlet he was calibrating. Sleep is overrated. I'll sleep when I'm dead, which according to probability mathematics could be any time. Now, he made a final adjustment, watched the diagnostic shift to green. Besides, someone told me once that health is a luxury. I'm just following that very wise and slightly hypocritical advice. She crossed to the workbench, moving with a fluid grace that meant her injuries had healed, or she was very good at hiding pain. Probably both. I brought food, Roll insisted, though he was distracted by Supply Sergeant Chen's return. Apparently they are now engaged in what he called direct communication about mutual interest. I did not ask for elaboration. Thank God for small miracles. Marcus accepted the ration pack she offered, something that actually smelled like food rather than the usual recycled despair. They finally figured it out. That Chen initiated direct verbal confirmation of romantic intent approximately 40 minutes ago. Roll's response was enthusiastic, if somewhat incoherent. Shikaru sat on the edge of the workbench, her usual spot, and Marcus felt something in his chest ease slightly. I believe the term he used was hell yes, repeated 7 times with increasing volume. That sounds about right. Marcus opened the ration pack, discovered it contained actual protein instead of protein-flavored paste, and briefly wondered if he was hallucinating from exhaustion. Where did you get this? I have my methods, mostly involving implied threats and the strategic application of my reputation. She picked up the gauntlet he'd been working on, examining it with those impossibly perceptive eyes. This is exceptional work. The servo response time has improved by 0.4 seconds. Impact resistance. She paused, running, her fingers over the reinforced. Knuckles. You designed this for direct combat. Application. And GT, but. And GT, you keep punching things I made. Punching things more efficient. He took a bite of actual food and nearly groaned. Don't tell me this violates some regulation about appropriate equipment usage. And GT, but. And GT, regulations become flexible when extinction is probable. She set down the gauntlet, her expression shifting to something more serious. Marcus, the briefing, you read it. And GT, I read it. And GT, then you understand the probability assessment. And GT, but. And GT, I understand that some very worried people with too much data and not enough hope did some math and decided we're probably doomed. He met her eyes directly. I also understand that probability isn't certainty, and I've spent the last 3 years keeping people alive in situations where the math said they should be dead. So forgive me if I'm not particularly impressed by their calculations. Shakara was quiet for a moment, studying him with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable. You have changed since we began this arrangement. And GT, but. And GT, yeah, well, getting assigned to maintain the equipment of a legendary alien warrior who treats death like a minor scheduling inconvenience tends to adjust your perspective. He gestured at the armor components surrounding them. I used to think my job was about machines, keeping systems functional, maximizing efficiency, treating everything like a technical problem with technical solutions. But it's not about machines, it's about the people inside them. That's a significant philosophical evolution. I'm full of surprises. For instance, did you know I've memorized the names you recite, all 671 of them? I can't pronounce half of them correctly, but I remember them. He stood, moved to stand in front of her. Keseth, who taught tactical rudeness. Thorin, who could navigate by stellar drift alone. Mickey, who sang before every battle. I remember because you remember. And he stopped, searching for words that seemed inadequate, and because remembering matters, even when the math says nothing matters. Shikaru reached up her hand, finding his face with the same gentle precision she'd shown once before. You are either very brave or very foolish. Can it be both? Marcus covered her hand with his own, feeling the warmth of her skin, the slight tremor that suggested she was less composed than she appeared. I prefer to think of it as optimistically reckless. That is not a recognized tactical category. Then we're inventing a new one. Seems appropriate given the circumstances. He leaned closer, close enough to see the patterns in her gray skin, the way her dark eyes reflected the amber light. Like deep water. Shikaru, when you go out there tomorrow in 34 hours. But in 34 hours, when you go out there with armor I've rebuilt 3 times over. In probability, that says you shouldn't come back. He stopped, forced himself to continue. Come back anyway. Defy the math. Be statistically improbable. I will execute to the best of my capability. That's not what I'm asking. I know. Her other hand came up to frame his face, her long fingers gentle against his skin. You are asking me to promise something I cannot guarantee. To prioritize my survival over tactical necessity. to choose personal continuity over mission efficiency. Yes, exactly that. Choose wrong, choose. Selfishly, choose to survive because someone here is going to be really annoyed if you don't. His hands found her waist, the bodysuit. Smooth beneath his palms, choose because this, whatever this is, doesn't get to end with a tactical assessment and a notation in someone's casualty report. Shikara pulled him closer, eliminating the last pretense of professional distance. This is highly inadvisable. You mentioned that before. The tactical complications alone are someone else's problem. Marcus brushed his thumb along her jaw, careful of the healing scar. Right now in this armory, with 34 hours until everything potentially ends, I'm declaring a tactical timeout on caring about complications. That is not how warfare works. Then warfare can wait. He kissed her, gentle and certain, and felt her respond with an intensity that contradicted every careful word she'd spoken about probability and duty and the statistical likelihood of survival. When they finally separated, both breathing harder than combat had ever made them, Shikara rested her forehead against his. If I survive tomorrow, when you survive, when I survive, we are having a prolonged discussion about your relationship with acceptable risk parameters, looking forward to it. Marcus smiled, the expression feeling strange after so many weeks of exhaustion and fear. I'll even let you use bullet points. I know how much your people love efficient communication. We do appreciate properly structured information. She stood and Marcus felt the loss of contact like a physical thing. I should return to my unit. Final preparations, strategic briefings, the ritual recitation of names before battle. Add one more name to your list. She paused at the entrance, looking back with an expression he couldn't quite read. Whose name? Mine. Add Marcus Vale. And so if the probability math is wrong, and you need one more reason to come back, you'll remember someone here is waiting. He picked up her helmet, the repairs gleaming in the amber light. Someone who happens to be very good at his job and intends to keep proving it. Shikaru crossed back to him, took the helmet, and kissed him again, brief, fierce, carrying the weight of things neither had words for in any language. Marcus Vale, and she said softly, as if testing how the name felt. I will remember. I will execute successfully, and I will return so you can lecture me about my inappropriate relationship with risk parameters. It's a date. That dates are a human social construct I do not fully understand. Then I'll explain it after you come back. Careful execution, statistical improbability, the whole package. He touched her face one last time. Careful, Shikaru, please be careful. She smiled, the expression transforming her face entirely. Careful. Yes, I will be careful. Then she was gone, disappearing into the amber twilight that would soon give way to battle, leaving Marcus alone with rebuilt armor and rebuilt hope, and the stubborn refusal to believe that probability was destiny. He returned to his workbench, picked up his tools, and continued working. 34 hours until the offensive. 34 hours to stack every variable in favor of survival. The math might say they were doomed, but Marcus had never been particularly good at accepting what the math said. Outside, the dying star cast its last light across a moon that had seen too many wars. Inside the armory, surrounded by ancient weapons and modern miracles, Marcus Valen built hope from hybrid alloys and the promise of someone coming. Home,